Okay. So the book has 30 chapters. So in a normal semester, we do two chapters a lecture, which is like insane. But today we're actually going to pull that off, and we're going to have a chance to kind of go through some extra interesting material as well. Question: has anybody ever gone through the JPEG standard or used discrete cosine transforms in any kind of depth? So one of the things that I've done lots of image processing coding in my past, but what the JPEG group actually did is much deeper mathematically. It's impressive, and it's over most computer scientists' heads. I think that includes me. But if you've got a super math nerd among us, they are the most likely candidate to have bumped into this before. I haven't found anyone yet in our sections that has done it. But I'm going to walk you through this multimedia chapter, and we're going to focus a little bit on this method because it's very surprising and how effective it is at compressing images. It does it a totally different way than you may have seen before. The normal method of doing compression is to look for repeating patterns and then get rid of all the duplicates and just say, here's how many to do. There's also ways of averaging numbers out, so you learn visually the person looking at the image can't really tell the difference between this one that takes more bits and this one that takes less bits, so use the one with less bits. So there's a lot of human factors engineering that's gone into it. I got to learn, for example, doing image processing, that humans see greens and blues much better than they do yellows and reds. So if you show two images that are the same wavelength distance apart, one in the yellow reds and one in the blue greens, we can spot the blue green difference. We can't spot the red yellow difference. Anybody want to guess why? We came from the water, and the water absorbs yellows and reds and passes blues and greens. So those of us who've survived this far to see Trump and everything else the world has to offer have eyes that are much more attuned to seeing differences in the area where we would have been predators or predated. So anyway, if you believe that, right? So kind of interesting. I got to learn that as a computer scientist doing image processing. I mean, so I took biology as a computer scientist. What do you know? So those are kind of the traditional ways of doing compression, and it's a lot of what's behind things like the electrical grid. Why do we use 60 hertz for the electrical grid? Why not 100 or 20? Why 60? Anybody know? Make a guess. Make a guess. Why do you think we alternate the current 60 times a second? Why that specific rate? It has nothing to do with the technology, really. It's everything to do with us. In fact, you could get away with doing it 50 cycles a second, and it would still work well enough. We can see things that are any slower than that. And so these fluorescent lights are blinking on and off 60 times a second, but we can't see it. It's too fast. So these have better ballast than most, but some lights, if you just do that with your teeth when you look at them, you can see the blinks. You can see but not these. These have better ballast. So human factors does, right? Money, politics, and religion. I guess that's the religion level, right? So what you're going to see today is a totally different approach that's sort of mathematically based, and it has nothing to do with that sort of human factors engineering. Okay, so this book is not just intended as a second course in networking. It's intended for people that take only this book for networking. So it does have all the introductory stuff in it as well. And so they lay out that interactive video and streaming video and stored video are kind of the three pillars of getting something across the internet. And they describe what the difference is between the two. We've talked about it before, using the internet for voice and applications and such. But this one actually walks us through what's happening with things like compression. So there are a whole range of algorithms that are used to specify exactly what it is you've done to the data to compress it. And I'm not talking about the discrete cosine transform stuff yet. I'm just talking about things like audio. So there are international standards. They have names like G711 and H323 and things like that, PCMU law, PCMU law. And those are standards that a lot of these video and audio conferencing protocols will support, like Skype, like WebEx, like MPEG players, things like that. And so when you send data, you have to specify which of those algorithms you use. They're called codecs in general. So if you've ever seen that name pop up, it stands for coder decoder. And it's how you basically are going to get the stuff done. So the chapter dives right into JPEGs. And so let's say we have an image that we want to encode as a JPEG image. And let's say, just for grins, it happens to be a solid gray picture. What JPEG will do is divide the image up into a series of 8 by 8 pixel quadrants, 64 pixels each. And they're going to try to encode in as few bits as possible what's needed to reproduce that image, so they can store it as succinctly as possible. So they will pass it through a discrete cosine transform algorithm. Passing this image through when it's been divided up this way is said to be passing through a blocked image. It's been broken into blocks. And then you're going to take the result and score it numerically, quantize it, and then compress it. And then what you have left is your compressed image. So first surprising result. What DCT will do is take an image. Let's say we've got a scale of 1 to, I don't know, 256 for how gray this picture is. And all 8 pixels across and all 8 pixels down for this 8 by 8 block that we've got, all have the same value of 20. It's kind of a, I don't know if that's dark gray or light gray, but it's definitely gray. Let me change something on the audio. Hold on just a second. Okay, I'm going to share back again. Okay. So if you hand a DCT algorithm this 8 by 8 square of all 20s, it's going to give you back a single number, 160. Does anybody see the relationship between the two? Yeah, me neither. So you want to make it weirder? You all are sitting down, right? How about if I make half the image light gray and half the image darker gray? Then I get 5 numbers that have this odd pattern, but it's only across the top. Yeah, okay. How about we make it completely gradated from light gray to dark gray with this kind of pattern? I get 7 numbers in this pattern. So this is intriguing because it's not at all obvious what's going on. But this is the result of doing something called a discrete cosine transform. And the book tantalizingly just tells us that's what it's doing and then doesn't bother to go explain how it works. So of course that consumed my next 50 hours of time trying to go out and dive around. And I will tell you that I've yet to find a description of it that is detailed enough to know exactly what's happening and not so hard that a good computer science student can't understand it, that it requires a deep math background that we might not typically have unless we just finished getting a math degree. Okay, so what they're basically doing is walking through the table in this sort of diagonal pattern, and they crank out these values at the bottom. So we're going to launch off into a different article now, and this is one of the ones that is more interesting to me. They did a little bit better job than most of the rest of them in showing what's going on. So the pre-processing divides the image into 8 by 8 blocks, and the values of the matrix are shown here. And this is a constant DCT matrix. So the rows of the matrix can be graphed because they're basically different values of different proportions of pi that are fed to the cosine function. So what the first row will crank out is a graph that looks like this. 8 points because it's a row with 8 values. And that's DCT row 1. They're evenly spaced points, starting with k pi divided by 16, where k is 1 through 1 through 8 for the row, or 1 through 7 for the row number that you're in. And basically what you're doing is just creating points equally spaced apart on a cosine that has a periodicity of 1/2 of a period for the width of pi that we're doing. So it hasn't gone back up again, it's only gone down, we've done it half. Then we look at the next row, and the next row basically is able to do 1 whole cycle. The next one does 1.5, the next one does 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, and 4. Right? So basically you're going to get a series of these. So how this is used to process gray intensities is combining values for how much of each of these you need at any given point to represent the dot. And so the best way I've been able to figure out how to wrap my head around this is by saying something like, if the value that you're trying to produce is this one, and you've got one graph that gives you a point up here, and the next one gives you the point here, you're getting close. You add these two together, and you're getting close to the value, but this one you'll do basically maybe none of, and this one maybe you'll do a lot of, and the average of these three things bullseyes the value you're trying to represent. So all I need to do is put in my row the quantity of each of these curves that I want added together to generate my result. I don't think that's accurate, but that's as close as I've been able to get until I find a deeper explanation. And this one's, this isn't an elementary school article. I mean, it sounds like it might be whydomath.com. It sounds like, oh, I can do my 5th grade homework or something. No, it's tougher. It's tougher than that. So they walk through and they show how you encode it and how you get a single number out of it. They walk you through another one. So it's possible that if I, dug into this and took another stab at it now that it's been a year, the light bulb might pop on. But I've dropped this out there for you in the extras folder in case you're interested. So my point about this is, don't blow off these standards thinking that you can write code just as good as they can. The work that they've done is better than anything I had ever seen anyone do before for image compression. And having looked at tons of code and written lots of algorithms to get it done. MPEG is similar. It basically will take a series of images and periodically put a fresh one out there. And I think I've shown you guys that with the truck in the desert with the tire spinning. Does that sound familiar to you? Keyframe? Anybody remember that? Anyone? Nobody? No one? Anyone? All right. Let me see if I can find keyframe. I can get lucky. There it is. Okay. So what most movie motion algorithms try to do is just send the differences between one frame and the next. And somebody's out there, it looks like, huh? You want to let them know it's okay to come in? Yeah. Just tell them we're talking about them. They need to come in and defend their honor. So every so often, what one of these motion algorithms will do is stop and push in a whole fresh new copy. So the problem with doing image compression this way, the problem with doing image compression this way is, let's say you have a series of images that you're trying to show, and most of the image has almost no change. You're filming a runner going across a background at night. So the background is pretty much dark. It's right before dawn. And yeah, if you watch 1,000 frames go by, the sky will get a little lighter. You'll notice it. But you are consumed with using what little bandwidth you have in sending the things that have changed more than that. So you divide up the image into a grid, and you look at how much this spot changed from the last cell, and you give it a value. This one changed 5, this one changed 4, these changed 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, almost none at all. And so you have to send out a packet every 100 milliseconds or so to keep the illusion going. And you have a limited amount of bandwidth that changes all the time based on how much you see that you're getting. And so you're going to fill the packet up with the parts of the image that change the most first, and then whatever you have left, you'll do the ones that change the most next. and then that's it. So you never get to the ones. So what ends up happening if you don't stop periodically and start over is as images go by, you will spend all of your time dealing with the person's eyelashes and mouth movements and their breath that's steamy because it's cold and their hands that are running, and you've completely missed the fact that the sun has risen because it happens so slowly that the difference from one frame to the next was so low it never ranked high enough up to be included in the packet. And that's what you see in this video. I managed to capture a video in between what are called keyframes or iframes, where you stop knowing that this is a risk, you stop and completely redraw the image from scratch. It's very low resolution when you do it because you have to draw the whole thing, but it's guaranteed that all of the image won't get so far away from reality that it looks crazy. So what's happening here is I've had a whole bunch of images go by that are all trying to modify the parts of this that have changed the most, one frame to the next. And so what you see happening, and I think I don't remember how to go through this frame by frame, but I think there is a way to do it. Maybe. So if I let this play, I'll play it. Okay, what I need to do is remember how to move it forward frame by frame. And I thought it was periods and commas, but it's not. Oh, it's probably arrows. Yeah, it's arrows. So you can see my cursor moving around, but that's just the screen capture I'm doing. And what will eventually happen here is I will get this thing to change. And this one may not show enough of it. I had 2 hits when I did this one. This was the other one. Yeah, this may be a better one. So let's take a look at this one. So what I'm going to do is go frame by frame. You can see it moving. You can see the tire treads in the bottom right. They're being edited. You see that? And the bottom left tire is changing. Most of the rest of this isn't because the algorithm is smart enough to know that all it's doing is moving to the right and it's tilting down a little bit. So it doesn't bother redrawing any of those. It just sends a little data that says, move everything to the right and scale it up a little and twist it. And it doesn't have to draw any of this other stuff that's moving. These parts down there are actually changing. Those tricks won't work for the tires. And as I get around, you'll see some colors start getting added. I think the license plate, I get a little red in here at one point. Things slow down elsewhere in the image where I can finally focus on something else. Okay, you see something down here that popped in and then immediately popped out. Super low resolution though. And at some point, in this case, I was rescued. It started to draw more and more in. The colors started showing up in here. But I got rescued finally at the end, and this actually got some color in it. I think this still looks like the beach in the background, so this didn't. And you know, it's very jagged. But then they changed their editing. In the edit of this video, they changed to a completely different, they cut, and what we say in video terminology is they had a cut, they switched to a different scene. And this scene picks up around the other side of the truck. So it's a completely fresh image. It's in very low resolution, but it's the whole thing from scratch. And I use my bandwidth up for that. And now I start the process over again. So as long as things are changing too much, I can spend my precious data bandwidth showing the tires moving, and the rest of the stuff just gets duplicated again. All right, so that's what's going on. I'm going to show you one more, which is a Nike video. Nike Dream Crazy. There it is. Did you see who's advertised on YouTube today? The actress from Roma. I thought it was really cool. All right, so here it is. So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm going to make sure this is in high resolution. 480 is not high enough. Let's go to 1080. I'm going to make this bigger. Okay, so this is the first frame of the video, and you can see what's going on. but it's fuzzy. And I don't know if it's clear enough on the video to make it out. But can you see individual eyelashes on this eye? Can you see the individual threads on the cap? Okay, I'm going to move forward a frame. What about now? Can you see eyelashes now? Can you see threads now? Because none of this stuff changed. So now they're able to focus the bandwidth that they have in the next packet all on this, on the detail. And if I move forward again, it gets clearer. Now look at the eyelashes. You can see all of them. And you can see threads now down here as well. You can count the threads. Look at it now. It's crystal sharp. So what you're seeing is this algorithm use its precious bandwidth on a per packet 100 millisecond basis to do the best that it can to capture the whole image first and then fill in details. So the longer you look at the image, the sharper it gets. That's the intention. So there's a lot of human factors engineering in this that's based on you need a minute to figure out what's happening to recognize what it is you're looking at anyway, and then to react. So now it's laser sharp. You can see the hairs on the chin, and you can even start to see some threads on the shirt, and they're going to change the scene. So now what I want to show you is why this video is hard to encode, because like lots of modern commercials, they need to keep you stimulated and interested. And so one way of doing that is to change the image constantly of what they're doing. So I'm going to say the word cut every time the whole image changes, and it requires I stop this process of making the image more refined and I start over with the low-res full screen view. Right, you ready? Now Text Network isn't going to work for me. So now I do need to go back to the low resolution, because I don't need to show you the resolution trick anymore. I just need to show you that it's happening. So unfortunately, around here, I can't get that much bandwidth. So I'll start over with this low bandwidth. Cut, 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 cut. This is a really good quality camera. Cut, cut, is that calling a dream crazy? Cut, not an insult. It's a compliment. Cut. So if you really want to see how well the algorithm does, the place in the video you want to go stare at for a while is in here. These are the hardest ones to encode. Just tons of gradation. I can see the rows of pixels in here. Probably you can't, because the red screen projector resolution is not that great. But if you look at the guy, you can see he's made out of little pixel blocks. And so that's the algorithm trying to average what's going on. So there are tools that will help you as a streamer write code to get this done. And one of the things that happens is you need to constantly monitor how well the network is performing. So with the way we work in lots of homes in Monterey and lots of homes in Mexico is we put a big tank on the roof, and the city dribbles water in it at a constant rate all day and all night long. And then we burst water out the bottom to flush the toilet or to take a shower or to water down the car or something, right? This works opposite of that. The data is arriving on a very bursty basis. The bandwidth changes. You may get one packet and then nothing, and then 10 packets and then nothing, and then one packet again. But you need to drain it out the bottom at a constant rate, because you're trying to play a video. And you need the same number of frames per second in front of the user to sustain the illusion of motion, because they're all just still images. We all know that. It's not really analog at all. So there are toolkits that you can use, and the chapter is going to walk us through a little bit of both of those things. So what MPEG basically does, it has a huge advantage if the image is stored ahead of time, and it can do this in real time as well. It not only looks at how much this frame changed from the one before, but it also looks at how much it's going to change in the next frame and the next one. So it does forward correction and compression as well, which is cheating, but it works really well. So they will calculate, like, yeah, I could use my bandwidth to get the eyelashes more refined, but you know what? The eyelashes are getting ready to go away in 2 frames when he throws his sunglasses on, So I need to preserve the bandwidth for that. So let's go ahead and use the threads in the cap instead. So something like that. Okay, so there is an algorithm that's available to get this done, and we'll look at a couple of things to do it. For a web browser, most of you may believe, like would make perfect sense, that the browser is able to render lots of things on its own. There's a little more intimate connection between the browser and the operating system. And what happens in lots of systems, especially all the early browsers, is they would use whatever program the operating system recommended to show the PDF, to display the JPEG image, to play the video in the page without having to go out to a separate program. When the web first began, whenever you embedded another object, it fired up another program. It was like you double-clicked on Word, or you double-clicked on Photoshop, or you double-clicked on Adobe Reader, and it wouldn't even run it in the same window. It took years of development, and so now everything is rendered in the window, but they're still using these constructs that the operating system vendors provided. So this breaks those things back out again and gives you the impression that there's a browser, and separate from that, there's a media player. So the media player's got a different task to deal with. It's got to get data and then figure out how to stream things across. So if you stream stuff, what you want to be careful of, one of the things is something called jitter. So in this example, I've got 3 packets on the right that are being delivered across the network to the left. And they are sent back to back. Each packet represents, must be a big packet, represents 10 seconds worth of, I don't know what this time scale is exactly supposed to represent. It's always confused me. It doesn't take 10 seconds to send anything on any network ever. So saying that there's 10 seconds to send a packet, the way I think to interpret this is there's 10 seconds worth of playback material in the first set of packets that go across, and then another 10 seconds. So there's 30 seconds worth of stuff here spread across 3 bundles of packets. There's 1 second of propagation delay. So the first one starts showing up at second 1 and ends at 31. But what really happens is this. There is varying delay between these packets. So these things will not show up the way you want. So the question is, if you are on the left and you're running this software, how many seconds after the first bit of the first packet arrives should you wait to begin replaying the video, so that the user doesn't experience any interruptions? What you could do is what we did forever, which is wait for the whole thing to arrive and then play it. But that's like going to Blockbuster Video and renting the DVD and coming home and playing it. Yeah, the whole thing's been delivered. You just walked in with the DVD. How hard was that? But if you're doing streamed video, you usually don't want to wait for the whole 2-hour movie to download before Netflix starts playing some of it for you. So we need to get a lot more complicated. So this is one of the problems. You can design networks that have 0 jitter, and there are some crazy examples, but this is typical. What jitter measures is the change in space between packets. If you send out 10 packets all in a row, evenly spaced, they may arrive in clumps. And so that's what we're trying to kind of deal with. And if we draw this out graphically, one way to draw this is to show, there it is. One way to draw this is to show what you're sending at the sending side, and I don't want to use that anymore. You're sending packets that look like this. Every time segment that goes by, you're sending another packet. So across the bottom is as time goes by, and across the top is another segment of the movie. So you're sending the movie out like this, but what's arriving at the other end may look like this. So you may get there in the same amount of time. So the question on the table is, when do I start playback? If you start playback here, everything under the line freezes the video until the packets catch up. If you wait until the slowest, worst performance you've ever witnessed this client application have in history, and you wait that long, it's a really long wait. And maybe the user is not that intolerant. Maybe a little pause is better. Or maybe you can write your algorithm better, and you'll say basically, I'm going to wait until there's 4 seconds worth of data stored. Maybe I can make this make more sense by saying there's 2 round trips worth of data stored. And if I start to run out, I get down to less than 1 round trip, I'll quickly send a message out saying, send me smaller packets. So they'll be more compressed. It will look like the eyelashes aren't clear again and I can't see the threads anymore, but at least I'm getting enough per second to display something. And so that's kind of the challenge you have. And so the software packages that are available for you will do all of that. They will solve the problem. You can design a network that has no jitter whatsoever. It's basically like a content delivery network, though. You own the whole thing. The hardest network design I ever did in my career, the most difficult to design for a customer, was a company called Bloomberg. Has anybody heard of them before? Yeah. So Michael Bloomberg is the mayor of New York, or at least was. I don't know if he still is anymore. But he's a billionaire. But unlike some of the billionaires from New York, he's nice. And so they have a news service. They also offer stock trading services. Every financial trader on the planet knows exactly who these people are, because their most famous product is something called the Bloomberg Terminal. And it's a computer display with a special keyboard with a lot of buttons that can make you wealthy or ruin you, like buy, sell, trade, option, buttons like important buttons, like launching nuclear weapons into your retirement plan kind of buttons. And traders use this stuff to make trades, but what's legally required, and also just a really good ethical idea, is to make sure everybody knows what the price is of something at the same time. And so they have a team of people that are as smart as any network designers that ever came out of the telephone company, and they require custom engineering for every single circuit, which means that somebody goes out and they actually measure with electronic equipment exactly how many feet this segment of cable is, and how much impedance it has and signal noise. Nobody ever does that. They just go by what's in the records. Well, I left this morning with 8,000 meters of cable, and I came back with 3,000 meters, so it's probably 5,000 meters long, right? But no, it's not exactly 5,000 meters long, because they had to cut, splice, and they probably somebody stole some, or who knows what. So we don't usually go out and do it, but this customer required it because however far away you were from New York, in order to have a Bloomberg terminal, they had to slow everybody else's down so that they saw the price the exact same instant you did, as far away as you were. And that doesn't always make the best sense, because there's people on the floor of the stock trading office that can see it happen faster. So they have categories, if I remember right from working with these guys. There are some trades that it's okay for you to get the data 1 second late. There's some kinds of offers that it's okay for you to get it a minute late, like what's the price of options, what's the strike date of options. Some of those things don't change as often as stock prices will. So it's sophisticated, and these guys design that stuff. So this is a network that doesn't tolerate any jitter whatsoever at all. So everybody has their own private circuit all the way back to wherever the nearest Bloomberg distribution router is. So they're not going over the internet, not at all, not for any of it. This is the news feed, it is, but these are 20-minute-old prices, largely, because that's what the Securities and Exchange Commission of the United States requires. Unless you have a license, or you're working for a license, you cannot see live stock prices. So whenever you hear them on the news, or see them streaming across in Aula Siete over there, those are 20 minutes old. They're not live. Okay, so let's see where we're at. I can give you one other example of a network that's got different kind of delay. This one's a little more esoteric, but this is a real routing network design challenge problem. And we assigned some of our very best engineers on Earth to solve this problem for these customers, because they were paying millions of dollars per router. and they wanted them as fast as we could make them. And they wanted to pay for improvements as fast as we could make them, and they were willing to pay for the scientists to do it. So these guys were basically figured out a way to manufacture money, and they wanted to do it as quickly as possible. So here's the deal. A stock trade shows up from someone to your local investor office. And I'm going to make, like Merrill Lynch, that's a company that you can have an account with and buy and sell stock. And let's say you ask to buy 100 shares of Apple at the market price. And let's say the market price is $300 even right now. So you basically are going to buy 100 shares of Apple, and that's the price you're going to pay. So it goes into a trading system. It begins to make its way to the market. Now, we don't yet know what the market price is. We won't know what the market price is until we hit the New York Stock Exchange servers, and they tell us what the price is. So this takes a certain amount of time to do it. And in the meantime, you pass through routers inside Merrill Lynch's network infrastructure to get there. And one of the things that Merrill Lynch can perfectly legally do is once they figure out what the price is, and let's say it's $300 a share, instead of pushing the money out to some random seller in the world's market, which is what this system will match you up with live in real time, if they have 300, if they have 100 shares of Apple themselves, they can sell them to you as long as it's at this price. Has to be fair. So they can sell you your own shares, perfectly legal to do. They sell you stuff from their own book of content. So here's what these guys did. They would have the information show up at the router, and they would see that you wanted to buy 100 shares. So they would have this unbelievably high-speed cut-through routing infrastructure, and it would arrive at the New York Stock Exchange maybe a millisecond before the regular stuff did through the routers that the New York Stock Exchange normally put users through. And they would find out before you did what the price of Apple stock really was. And if they saw that it was going up, they could quickly buy 100 shares and then a millisecond later sell them to you as if they had owned them all along. And maybe they make 1/100 of a cent per share. Do that a couple of trillion times a day, and you're making some real money. So the SEC finally caught wind of it, and all they had to say was, knock it off. And it all evaporated instantly overnight. Because these guys can, like, squeeze you to dust and put you out of business like that, or put you in jail. And New York has rules that are just as tough as the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission, which is why all brokers have to pass the New York. My son is a broker. He lives in Seattle. He has a huge exam coming up in June, and it's the New York, one of the big New York exams. If you don't have a New York license, you can't buy or sell stock anywhere on the planet that has registered at the New York Stock Exchange. So it's super highly regulated, thank God, because people would cheat their ass off, and we would all get like fleeced if they didn't. And some of it still happens anyway. So this was unethical, and it finally got stopped. But in the meantime, it fueled millions of dollars worth of R&D development and pushed routing technology forward a lot faster than would have happened before, because our own R&D budget wasn't willing to invest that much in speeding it up, but this customer was. So you'll find unique opportunities to design these protocols a little bit differently sometimes. Okay, so that's what jitter looks like. And so what these algorithms have to try to figure out what to do is how to make it happen. What you don't want to do is drain the swamp. You don't want to drain this bucket. Remember the tank on top of the roof? Water filters in slowly all day and you dump it out the bottom. We're doing the opposite. You don't want to have this thing ever get empty. There's a bunch of different codecs that I mentioned earlier, and these tools that you have available that are free, like RTP, you can pick whatever compression algorithm you want, encoding algorithm you want. But if you're going to try to write something streaming, you should start with what's there already. And RTP actually will build the packages, and then RTCP sits on top of UDP and actually sends the information back and forth. So one of them uses odd numbered ports, the other one uses even numbered ports. So basically the rest of this chapter is just a review of how this stuff works. There are other ones out there as well, Streaming Control Protocol, SCTP, that runs on top of HTTP. That's valid as well. But these are out there, and they're there for you guys to use. And they'll deal with switching feed speeds and switching to a different compression algorithm and not letting the video pause if at all possible. That's what they're trying to do. So when you run YouTube and you pick, oh, I think I misspelled it, and you pick any video to watch, which slowly shows up. So we can pick the featured one because I think this woman is amazing.
Hola, soy Alisa. Y cualquier día es bueno para
Okay, so what I'm going to look at is the speed. It's 240 right now. And we'll come back in a minute.
Huawei P30 reescribe México.
Queremos que estrenes doble. Por eso la
Oh, well, that guy ruined it. Jeez. Nice, beautiful thing. And then this guy comes in. He sounds like the Suriana sales guy, right? Okay. He's going to have avocados at the end of this thing as well. So if you watch on particularly good wireless networks, you'll see the speed go up and down. YouTube will change in the middle of a broadcast for you. Okay. Let's see where we are and how we are doing. There's more detail in here that we do not need that describes how this works. I want to spend a minute on telephone calls over the internet. There are two key protocols, SIP and H323. You will see both of them all the time, and you will see nothing else but these two for the large majority of the time. When you buy an IP phone, like a Cisco phone, like we use on campus, you plug it into Ethernet. You don't plug it into the phone line. It has a little switch in the back, so you don't use up the one and only port you've got. It gives you a place to still plug your PC back in if you want. And it uses power over Ethernet, so the switches at the end of the hall have to be upgraded because this thing doesn't have an AC outlet. It doesn't plug into the AC outlet. All the power it needs to run comes over a pair of the Ethernet wires. It's called PoE, power over Ethernet. So, of course, you're going to have to replace all of your switches. Aw. And so that makes the Cisco sales guy like super happy as well. Like, oh, you have to replace all of your, I'm so sorry. So there's sometimes you can get around a little bit of that. But these protocols basically will compress audio and video, and they're interchangeable, so you can buy anybody's phones. You also can write software that speaks these protocols and then have a telephone call over the internet. So you can do it between dissimilar systems. They work pretty great. When my ex worked, well, she just retired from Shell a couple of months ago, but she worked there for 30-something years. When she would go to Singapore, which was pretty often, she took her laptop, and when she opened her laptop up, it would use DHCP and get an IP address, and her voice over IP Microsoft app would see that the IP address had changed, and it would send a packet across Shell's network back to the mothership in Houston, and it would tell Houston, I'm here now. And Houston would associate her phone number with the IP address on the Shell network. And if a call came through, it would come through sometimes the outside world from the public switch telephone network. It's called PSTN. That's what we call it everywhere. It would arrive at what the telephone caller thought was just like a phone switch, but it's a router that has telephone line cards plugged into it, and it spits out IP on Ethernet out the back. And it would encode the phone call. It would build H323 control messages and send it across the Shell network. It would cause packets to arrive at her port number, and inside would be messages that would cause her soft phone to play an MP3 file that sounded like a telephone ringing, whichever one she wanted, and she could pick up her headset, which was plugged into USB or Bluetooth, and touch a button, and it would answer the call, and she could have a live call with me on my cell phone in Houston, and she would be in Singapore. Part of it traveled over IP, and it was converted back to the same analog signal system that's been used for 50 years by the telephone network, and it would travel part of the way before it got to the cellular network, and they would re-encode it in a completely different way there. So this thing got re-encoded 3 or 4 times, but it was at least digital. You had some loss due to compression changes, but not loss due to noise. So it's amazing, and it works. So you can go through all of these transformations, but this stuff is now completely common. It used to work like crap. It used to be really, really spotty, and network managers that loved being taken to baseball games and going on golf outings and being taken to very fancy dinners and lunches and going with the Cisco sales rep on ski trips. You know, they were really excited about this idea of switching all of their company's telephones over to voice over IP phones and getting rid of my product that I sold them from AT&T. And I'm like, why don't you just rip my heart out if you're going to do that? So that argument didn't work very well. And, you know, we knew it was coming. We knew voice over IP was going to be there at some point, but it was not ready yet. So I came up with a couple of killer suggestions. And one of them was, okay, if you've got to, you know, bug up your butt to go change your entire company over to voice over IP so fast, tell me this. And we'd do this in a conference room with like senior directors, and I'd make sure the highest level person we knew in the company, like the telephone guy, who's like this with the network guy all the time, because he's going to lose his job if they switch us over. He'd bring his vice president, and I go, let's do your annual performance review with your boss over this phone. How about that? If you think this phone is that good, let's have you do your annual performance review to find out what kind of raise you get and what kind of job you did using one of these phones. And I hope it works great for you, because if it sounds like crap, like it will, you're going to get fired. That was one argument. That one worked pretty well. Some customers went for that. The other one was, I tell you what, let's let the president of the company make the first call to the most important person he talks to, which is his broker that has Fidelity Investments that invested $50 million in your company last year. Let's have him, I'll drop one of those phones off, my expense, we'll plug it into your network, and have him do his next quarterly earnings report using that phone. What do you think? Ready? I got one in my trunk. We'll plug it in now, and, you know, they would like, well, you can separate people that believe in it and not, just like that. You just make it important. They would never in a million years volunteer to do it. Now, you wouldn't think twice about it. It's the only way you would do it. But you got to ask yourself these questions when you're adopting these technologies like that, you know, to know whether it's really worth it. And it's a lot of fun to think up like challenging questions like that, and like know that you like, aha, I finally found you're not going to do it. You won't do it. So we used to do all kinds of crazy stuff. Like we would let MCI, which was a big competitor of ours, they would try for 6-8 months, and we did the same thing to their customers, to steal a customer away, and they would show them, like if they had 6,000 gas stations like Valero Energy, they would drop their rate per store per month like $5 a month, and it added up to like all this money. But you had to pay for 2 networks at once during the conversion, so it, you know, took a long time. And so I would build these spreadsheets that I would skip all those guys, and I would go into the chief financial officer, and I would say, do you realize that your IT organization is getting ready to sign a contract that will keep you from hitting your earnings target this year? And they're like, what? So that'll kill that right there. And the other trick we would do is we'd wait till the end of the 6-month period when they were ready to sign the contract, and I would walk into like the vice president's office and go, well, I guess this is it. I guess you guys are going to really do this thing. You're going to kick us out, and we worked really closely with your team. I understand what you're doing. You know, there's really no technical difference. I mean, all you're doing is trying to save a little bit of money with this, because they don't do anything any better than we do. Yep, I get them to admit it, and I go, just for grants, how much are they telling you they're going to save you? They're going to save me $200,000 over 3 years. And I would go, well, here's a check for $200,000. Why don't you just move on and do something else instead of ripping your whole network up and putting your whole job at risk for the next 2 years? And I'd just blow up their deal, just like that. So you build a war chest, you save some of the money you earn from these customers, and you build up a war chest, and you open it up, and you bomb the competition. Whenever they get too close, you just like nuke them. They did the same thing to us. It was just like warfare. So which layer of the protocol stack is this? Money and some politics, right? It had nothing to do with the version of the router they were going to put into the stores and the monitoring. None of that crap made any difference to the senior executives. They couldn't care less. They'd rather have no network at all if they could figure out how to run their business and do it. So you guys are smart enough. You can pull stunts like that. Not a lot of people you'll run into can. So think about that stuff. Think about the business impact of things, because there's almost always a way around all of that arguing. Let all the engineers just fight it to the death and do all that. Just go right around them to the one person that has veto power. It's like, instead of fighting with all your brothers and sisters, just go tell mom. Right? Mom can put a stop to it. She's got like veto power. Am I right? So that's kind of the way to do it. So needless to say, I loved my job. It was the best job I ever had. I loved watching people underestimate us and then make them pay for it by not doing their homework correctly. Okay, so this basically shows you graphically for one of these voice over IP systems more or less how it works, but it's similar to the protocols you guys have used before. You've got somebody that's trying to make a phone call to a telephone, and there are protocols that you speak out of a router that will talk to the telephone network. There are published, and they're totally different than the ones you use with TCP/IP, but they're protocols as well. There are messages with signals. You send them over a separate line, and you tell the phone switch, I want to make a phone call, and here's the phone number, and here's what I want to show up on the caller ID, and all of that stuff. Right? So there's a whole different protocol. Nobody teaches that stuff in networking classes. That's a telecommunications course, and maybe tech will teach one again someday. Okay, let's see where we're at. Time to take a break. We have one other chapter. I'll show you this before. No, not this one. This one. Leaky bucket. Bursty flow in, fixed flow out. So that's the problem you're trying to solve with streaming media over the internet. That you can't regulate the evenness with which the data shows up, but you must spit it out evenly. All right? So that's the kind of key challenge with all these algorithms. Okay, when we come back, we have security to talk about. And I'm going to get you into cryptography and network security that you kind of understand one of the big landmark changes that happened in 1979 that kind of changed the world and made three guys very famous and rich, until about 10 years later, somebody else came out and said, well, we already did it before you did. We just couldn't tell anybody because it was a secret. So we'll do that when we come back. You guys want to take 10 minutes? Does that sound okay? All right? Okay. Anybody need anything from Oxo? Batteries? Paper towels? Toothpaste? Nothing? No? You still like the stories, right? I'm not like, okay. Yeah. So anybody watch the game last night? Yep. Who were you cheering for? Who were you cheering for? Rayados or Tigres? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, one of my favorite students. He and I still keep in touch, and he's a diehard Tigres fan. But we're very nice to each other. So we applaud each other's wins and console each other's losses. But what the hell was that all over the field? God, that just drove, the confetti. Like, who's Okay, so we're going to finish up today by talking about some cryptography topics. Cryptography is a huge, network security is a huge, wide area. We're really concerned with sort of trying to add some structure to this so you guys can understand what some of the terminology is. There's several different kinds of security attacks, ones that take a site down, ones that basically make it untrustworthy, and one that allow people to detect what you're doing. So those are three broad categories. The ones that are probably the most concerning these days are the threat to integrity. There are attacks now that people have figured out that will hack the firmware on a motherboard and render it useless. It's an attack that has to be defended against very aggressively quickly, because for the systems that have been penetrated this way, they basically have to be thrown in the trash. There's no way to recover them. It's a permanent destruction, which is kind of crazy. What I want to do today is kind of come up with some terminology and then help you guys understand what one of the really key changes was that allowed encryption to lurch forward, to kind of jump forward on the internet. For most of history, the idea of changing the message to something that's harder to understand involved two paths of communication. One for the message once it had been changed so as to make it ununderstandable by someone who might be eavesdropping. So that's the bottom part of this diagram, where you're going to send your information across an insecure channel. Great, thanks. Okay, I tell this person I can't talk. So in order for that to work, you need to agree on some scheme that you're going to use to change one letter to another, or to change one number to another, to disguise the message. And the method used to do that is called a cipher, but you would exchange the process ahead of time on a separate communication channel. You would not mail someone the password for an unsecure mail system so they could use the password to secure their email. That would be crazy, right? You wouldn't write on the board a password so that you could write things on the board that no one could understand. You're going to use a separate channel. So when I worked as a volunteer, I worked as a student at the college radio station when radio was kind of a bigger deal in university, we got an envelope in the mail every month from the Federal Communications Commission. And it was this big orange, sort of thick, really thick paper, ominous, dangerous looking thing. And it was an envelope taped inside that contained the code that had to be confirmed for you to know to rebroadcast what was coming from whatever the emergency network was. Basically, you had a radio in the studio that was tuned to a frequency that emergency broadcasts were sent over. And you received them, and then you would repeat them to the audience. So you could write them down, or you could point the microphone at it, or whatever you wanted to do. But in order to prove that it was a legitimate message, they would use two code words, Alpha Bravo, something like that. And so those were inside this folder. And so you, every month, only the official radio stations and television stations would receive this, and it would cut down on fake messages being broadcast. But I said there was an envelope taped inside this thing. And the envelope was to be used for something a little different. And the envelope was, if the thing came on and said, the President of the United States is about to make an announcement to the country, and here's your code, it had to match what was on the outside of the envelope. Then you would open it and take a card out, and there was another code, two other words, and they had to tell you that one as well. And if those matched, then basically you had about a minute head start to get in your car and drive out of town as fast as you can before the Russians' nuclear bomb hit. And maybe you can make it out of there faster than some of your neighbors. That was basically what the significance of that was, because it was the only time that was ever going to be used, is if the Russians were about to bomb us and the president was going to say goodbye or whatever they were going to say. Right? So thank God the thing never got used. But they used a separate communications channel to send this password, this code, this cipher, than the one they used to send the information itself. Got it? Okay, so this is a problem on the internet, because who wants to have two communication channels? Every time before you open a website, do you want to have to call them up and write down a number code? And banks do this all the time with two-factor authentication. They'll text you a number that you then have to type in. So we're kind of getting back to that anyway. But what happened in '79 was revolutionary. And so what happened in '79 was three scientists from MIT, Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman, wrote a paper that talked about how to put into practice, actually got it down to a point where people could write code and implement it, a system that did not require a separate channel for password exchange. How? How can you possibly manage to do that? So have you guys ever used public key encryption? Anybody know PKE, what that is? So we'll talk about it, and then that's where we'll spend the rest of our time is in the section. So we'll build up to that. There are other ciphers, transposition ciphers, where you just change the letters around. There are ones that cycle through multiple times, that you take a whole big alphabet and you reduce it down to a few codes, or a few codes and you blast it out to a whole big alphabet. So those are compression and expansion permutations. Then there are ones that do exclusive ORs and shifts and combinations and splits and swaps, every kind of algorithm you could imagine. But as long as the other person was using the same one, you could do it. But these are easy to detect. You can do what's called a brute force attack. And what a brute force attack basically means is you just try every possible password until you find one that turns the message into English, if that's what you're expecting it to be, for example. DES did something that was much more secure. It's insecure now, though. You don't want to use it any longer. It takes a second to hack it. What DES did was use a set of 48-bit keys that were generated by a key generator that was fed, in turn, a 56-bit key. So you start with a 56-bit key, you feed it to this key generator, it cranks out all these 48-bit keys, and the 48-bit keys are used in each of 16 rounds, and what these rounds do are feed an algorithm that permutes your input data to something unrecognizable. And the idea was, if you do it 16 times, it's like putting something in the, the bartender that shakes your margarita for like a full minute. Like, okay, it's enough. Like, I'm thirsty. And so that's kind of the idea. The problem is the round key generator is reproducible. Everybody has to have it. So you can just try all the 56-bit keys that are out there until you find the one that magically unlocks all this stuff. So it's hackable. It's not enough bits. So that one's kind of gone, had its play. Then there's another one that is AES, and I don't think it's exactly the same one again, but here's the issue, right? You have to have a secure key exchange channel, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But there's other ones out here that basically use more bits. And I have a calculator here. Let me see, what is that called? Cost of decryption. Here we go. I got this off of a guy on Stack Exchange. And he published a spreadsheet. It was a Google sheet, but I turned it into an Excel because I'm old school. And it shows you how long it would take you and how much money it would be required to crack a code in a year. So if you're using a 73-bit code, you need 2 modern Intel servers running the best decryption software available at a cost of $1,000 to brute force attack the exchange. So you definitely do not want to be using 73-bit keys. If you use an 83-bit key, you'll need a couple of thousand machines and $1 million. This would be like a company could maybe pull this off, or if you're a good hacker, you might be able to confiscate enough cycles on enough machines by getting them to click on your erroneous email to do it. If you have 93 bits, you need a couple of million machines and $1 billion. Now you're talking like Russia. And if you use 100 bits, you need a couple of million machines and $1 trillion. Now you're talking about like the United States government. They really want to go after you. They can like make that happen for you. All right, so it's kind of cool to see it. You can plug in whatever your own cost for electricity is and what a server uses and how much it's going to cost in a year and all that kind of stuff. And the decryptions are needed. So there's a trade-off for this. So like, why doesn't everybody use a 1,000-bit key? So why don't we? Why don't we use a 102-bit key for our credit cards when we slide it in the little card reader at Centrales? It's more expensive, but in a roundabout way. But that is the answer. It takes a lot longer for the calculation to be completed, to know whether it's really your credit card and for the transaction to be approved. 30 seconds to 3 minutes. So that costs them money. they lose customers. So it's always about the money at some level, right? So it's kind of interesting to see the trade-off that we make, speed versus safety. The CEO of Target, who is my customer, which is a big store that competes with Walmart in the United States, they had they had the types of card readers for credit cards that took chips. They were the last country on the planet to use those, right? We're like, we still use magnetic stripes up until the beginning of last year. You can believe it. Like, save me. And I just won't shop at a place that won't do it. Like, nope, I'm not buying anything from you. I don't want to get my card stolen again. I don't trust you guys. Sorry. So he had a chance to put those into his stores, but it took something like 6 to 8 seconds longer per transaction, and they decided not to do it. And it cost him his job because what happened was people hacked into the card readers that they had, and for like a year and a half, just collected everybody's credit card numbers and sold them. So 400 million people, including me, had their credit card numbers compromised. So there is a site out there that you guys can go to and type in the places where you have accounts, like bank names or Amazon or Mexico, etc. You can also type in your email address, and they will tell you whether those sites have been compromised and whether your email address has shown up for sale with its password on any of the underground sites. And if you use the same password on every site, it was nice knowing you. You'll be robbed blind. As soon as you have any money, it will all disappear. So I use a password keeper that generates random passwords. So the fight that I have with people is, why don't you let me copy and paste my password into your field? Because we want you to type it. We're worried about your security. Well, you know, you're ruining my security because I have no idea what my password is. My password keeper pastes it in for me. It's 32 characters, random string. You are making me open it up and make it visible on my screen and type it on my keyboard, where a key capture program could steal it. So you're a bunch of idiots. Right? So stop. So I'm kind of a jerk with password stuff. When people try to do something because they think they know what they're doing and they know absolutely nothing whatsoever what they're talking about. That's usually when I weigh in on things. Okay, so let me talk to you guys about the way Ravish Shamir and Edelman pulled this thing off. One more thing on passwords before we forget. I don't think I've talked to you guys about this before. You know, everybody has rules for passwords. So I want you guys to help me with something. I'm going to draw a circle that represents all of the world's possible passwords. They all appear as dots inside this ball. Okay. So if I'm going to try to guess your password, it could be anywhere in here. Uppercase, lowercase, numbers, all that kind of stuff. So do you guys run into rules for passwords on any sites? Okay, give me an example of one of the rules you run into. Okay, at least 8 characters. Anybody else seen that? Okay, so all of the passwords in the world that are 7 characters or less, the hacker does not even need to bother trying, because you just told him, don't bother, can't be any of those. All right, give me another rule. Special characters. So all the passwords in the world that do not have special characters, they do not need to try any of those. You just saved them trillions of CPU cycles of guessing because you've just told them that's not going to be part of the answer. You're giving them hints. Keep going. Give me another one. Use numbers and letters. All the passwords that do not have both numbers and letters may now be excluded from my search of all potential passwords to try and crack what your account password is. It's stupid. I mean, that's the only word for it. These are designed by people who don't know anything about what they're doing. All you're doing when you design these schemes is making it easier for the hackers. You're making the passwords worse, not better. If you want to have a simple rule, there are sites now, like Google, they will say, try a more complicated password, please. And that's it. They'll let you pick whatever you want. But if they think it's in the short dictionary of things that people will try, then they'll ask you to please pick something more complicated. And that's about it. And some people favor using biometrics, like your fingerprint or your retinal scan. Great. What are you going to do when somebody steals your fingerprint? Get a new finger? I mean, passwords are terrible ways of securing anything. And so they need to go away. Google's trying very hard to eliminate them completely. They should just disappear. There should be other methods. Microsoft's got really good ideas. Google has some good ideas. Microsoft has an authenticator. Banks in Mexico are among the most secure I've ever seen on the planet. So much so that I can't even get stuff done half the time. But I ended up flying on the plane with the vice president of sales for RSA, actually. And he was telling me about all the things the Mexican banks do that are different. And he said when you log into Banorte, for example, they check about 100 different variables before they decide whether to pass you on through to log in or whether to pass you through extra screening. Things like time of day, how fast you typed it, have they seen the browser before, what type of computer is it, how much memory does it have, what version of browser, you know, how long has it been since your last login, all kinds of crazy stuff. What were the last transactions you did? When's the last time you came into the bank? When's the last time you made a phone call? When's the last time you had a missed password or guest password? They look at all those things and roll into a formula to assess risk. And if you have a low enough risk, they'll log you in. And if not, they may pass you through, ask you to pass you a number, tell you enter it into your phone, give me the token back, and stuff like that. It was not at all what I expected. Yes?
I'm not interested in fingerprint or not the iPhone. So it's like a password you so you can really do that.
I'm not surprised. I just wait till they're asleep and use their phone, you know, log into it that way. There have been some really funny videos on that. So yeah, I'm not surprised. And you know, we have telemetry systems in AT&T's data centers we used to use, and they would measure bone density in your hand. And they would look at your bone structure and measure the bone density and the temperature and the amount of flesh on each finger. So you couldn't even cut off someone's hand and do it. You'd have to like get the blood pumping back through it. You'd have to cut yours off and transplant it. And so that was hard. That was hard to hack. But you know, that was like a military grade security feature to protect customer data inside the data center. The problem is it's the person, it's not the system. People will walk out with it on something. Okay, so let me get to public key encryption. So here's the idea. I have Alice, user A, Alice and Bob. And they want to send something to each other. And there's three things that I would like to make sure of. The first one is that only Bob can read it. And I'm going to expand upon that and change the definition of that a little bit. And what I'm going to say instead, and it's, if you'll hang with me, it's kind of a roundabout way of getting to it. I'm going to say it's really Bob. All right? And the second thing I want to make sure of is that it's really Alice. And the third thing I want to make sure of is no one else can eavesdrop. No one else can sort of figure out what we're doing. So there's a variety of things. Great. Chase Bank just said, we've just sent an important security communication to your confidential mailbox. Awesome. So apparently they're listening in. So I can have a password, and if I take a message and I encode it with my password, I get an encrypted message out of it, and I can send it across this communication channel. But the problem is Bob's going to need the password at the other end, right, to get it undone? So how am I going to do that without using a separate communication channel? So that's not going to work. That's no good. So what public key encryption does is two steps. They give you two passwords. They give you one password that is public. Let me do it like this. What nomenclature do I want to use? A, public. And I'm going to have a second password that's A, private. Okay? So the idea is if I take my message and I run it through an algorithm with my private key, then I can take that message that comes out of it and run it through again, this time with my public key, and I'll get back my message. Right? Also, it's reversible. So I can first encrypt it with my public key and then decrypt it with my private key, and I'll get the message back. So what I want to do before I send something to Bob is I want to encrypt it with my private key, take the original message, encrypt it with the private key, and send it to Bob. And Bob is going to take my public key and this encrypted message, and this key is public. It's posted somewhere. Anyone in the world can see it. I don't care if everyone has it. No more danger from people learning my password. This is a public key. But the math algorithm I'm using is one such that even if you know the public key, it's essentially impossible to calculate the private key. It would take a million years or something like that. And therefore, this is felt to be highly secure. All right, so what have I accomplished so far by doing this? I sent a message, and Bob says, I just got a message. The message says it's from Alice. So I'm going to go get Alice's public key, and I'm going to decrypt it. And if it works, then it really came from Alice. Right? So I can check off it's really Alice. Can I check off that it's really Bob, meaning that only Bob gets it? I mean, is Bob the only person that can decrypt Alice's message? Anyone can. All I used was Alice's public key. It's public. So anyone can decrypt it if they just go find her posted public key. So it doesn't do the it's really for Bob. And anyone can eavesdrop and grab the message and decrypt it. So it doesn't do the other two. All right, let's try turning this thing around. What if instead I use Bob's public key to encrypt the message, and I send it over to Bob, and he takes this encrypted message and decrypts it with his private key. Remember I told you could do it either way? And he's going to get the original message out. So the decryption works. He gets the message. Now which of these can I check off? It's really Bob, so you can check that one off. If somebody else eavesdrops on this message, can they decrypt it? No, because they need Bob's private key. So as long as he keeps his private key private, he's good. If he loses it, just regenerate a new public-private key quickly and repost a new public key. So that's the idea. So it can be regenerated at any point. What do I do if I want to do all three of these things at once? Do both of them. Start off with this message and feed it here. When you get to the other end, take the output of this message and feed it here. You'll get the message back. So to write it a different way, you take your original message, encode it with Alice's private key, and then Bob's public key, and you send it. And what Bob will do is exactly the opposite. He will take this doubly encrypted message. First, he will decrypt it with his private key, and then he will decrypt it with Alice's public key. No one ever has to worry about passwords getting stolen. You can send the passwords over the same transmission medium. This rocked my world. This was unbelievable. And it's based on Euler's formula and 100-digit long prime numbers, but it's a class of algorithm that's been known for a while called one-way trapdoor algorithms, where you can calculate left to right really easily, but it's impossible to go in the reverse direction. If you show me the result of the encryption, I can't figure out how to reverse the process and come up with the original message again. So that better be right, because that's what we're counting on. What web servers and things do is a little bit different. You don't exchange, you don't have a public key to give to the website. So it's not going to work exactly the same way. So let's take a look at one. By the way, I had this up because I was telling a class earlier that Dan Bonet is a really good lecturer from Stanford, and they have a security certificate program. You take 6 courses for $500 a piece. It's all online, and you get a security certificate. And Cisco had paid for me to go through part of that before I retired. And I got too busy with teaching, but one of them is now out on Coursera, and it wasn't at the time. So it's fun. He's a very good lecturer, and he also is kind of a smart ass like me a little bit, and he'll tell you, I don't know if he does it in the Coursera one. I think probably it's just the same videos. You just gave it to them, so it will. But he tells all the horror stories about people that did stupid things and like ruined their company security and had a lot of stuff stolen. And he basically names them and shames them. It's pretty, as long as it's not you, it's really funny. All right, so this site is secure. What does that mean? It means there's a certificate associated with it. I can open the certificate up. It says it's validated by Amazon, so Amazon offers a security certification service, and I can bring up more information on it. And here is the actual certificate associated. So what happened when I made my connection to this website was I negotiated for an HTTPS connection. They gave me a web page back. The web page consisted of all the stuff that I wanted on the base web page, plus a certificate. The certificate was further encrypted with the public key that was assigned to this certificate by Amazon. And I received both. So I see that the web page claims to come from Amazon. My browser will take the URL, the domain name, and the certificate, and send it to the certification authority, to Amazon.com, and ask Amazon, is this site really from Coursera.org? And what Amazon will do is take the certificate, which they had encrypted with their private key that they set aside just for Coursera, and if I've used the public key and handed it back, the only way it will make sense is if it really came from Coursera. So Amazon encrypted a certificate and gave it to Coursera and said, hand this out along with your web page to anybody that comes to your site. And they're going to hand it to me, and I will tell them if it really came from you or not. And so people have screwed this up, and they've lost all their certificates before. I think VeriSign did that a few years ago. But it's a way of verifying who it is. So you're using a trusted intermediate party instead of just exchanging keys directly with each other. And that's done all the time. All the time. You will do that. Okay, so that's basically the way this public key encryption works. So I told you that these guys got rich and famous. There was a company called RSA, and there's the 2 universities on Earth who have created more companies than any of the others are guess which do. Nope. MIT is one, and Stanford's the other. And they're neck and neck, about 20,000 companies each. And on any given day, 3 million people go to work at companies that Stanford founded, and it generates, I don't know, like $5 billion in revenue a year for the world or something like that. They kind of try to keep track of that stuff. So it's kind of fun, but they are orders of magnitude, I think, over anybody else. I don't think anybody else is close to doing them. So they've been doing this for a while. So every member of the faculty at computer science at Stanford and MIT are millionaires because they get asked to advise their startups that their students found, and they get some founder stock, or they sit on the board, or things like that. So crazy, huh? You get admitted, you're like, yeah, who knew? Little nerds take over the world. The professors wearing an old T-shirt don't believe it. All right, so we kind of walked through the way this stuff works. There's other stuff that's not really covered in the book, and I want to share a little bit of that with you. And one of them is a presentation I made for Tech last spring, and then before that, fall at a university in Puebla on behalf of Tech. So this one was one specifically on DDoS attacks, and I don't know if you guys feel like you know what they are already. You probably do if you think you do, because they're not that hard to understand. But to kind of get to some of the basics, viruses and worms are two ways of spreading software that can launch a DDoS attack. What a virus will do is spread by forwarding it to everyone else. What a worm will do is basically let somebody, without any help from you, take advantage of a known bug in an operating system that you failed to patch and get software in. So that was how the GitHub attack happened last year and a half ago when people failed to update their Internet of Things devices. So this has been going on forever, since 1974. One of the first one was a direct attack by a student who thought it would just kind of be funny in high school, and it was just, you know, to the races after that. So what exactly is being attacked? Mostly it's been network devices and applications themselves. So you can attack a network by just flooding the network with so much data that the data can't all get to the server anymore, and you can attack applications. But there are different attacks for every single one of these areas, for every transport protocol you've ever heard of, for every application you've ever heard of, for every network tool you've ever heard of. And so there are tons of these out there, and I'll show you a list of the ones just for, like, I think it's DNS is the one I pulled. But three big categories of DDoS attacks specifically: saturate the network, overwhelm the software, or attack the hardware. And I told you about the attack the hardware one a minute ago. Go in and wreck the firmware and brick the system. So these things fall into amplification and non-amplification attacks. And I'll walk you through a little bit about what the difference in those are. So here's an example of the names of attacks that some of them actually have names assigned to them, but these are the software packages that people have figured out how to hack the daylights out of and use to launch DDoS attacks or make the victim of a DDoS attack. You can overwhelm DNS, for example. That happened with Dyn Solutions and took down about a third of the internet because by suffocating their DNS servers, they were no longer able to push DNS responses out because they weren't getting the requests. Telmex was one of the companies that used Dyn to feed all of their DNS servers. So you know what's happening in the DNS server. The counter is counting down for every DNS entry. It's got a time to live, and as soon as it hits 0, it's gone, and you go and ask for it again the next time somebody needs it. So if it's a site like Google, they set a really short time frame on their DNS entries, like 5 minutes, 1 minute, some cases. So in 1 minute, no one can reach Google anymore. That's for real. So this happened because people were able to overwhelm Dyn's DNS servers. So that's an example of one of the types of attack that are out there. But these things also have an amplification factor. So the way an amplification attack works is I pretend I'm someone else and I ask you a question that has a really big answer. And when you give me the really big answer, it takes up a lot of my time and bandwidth. So if I can get a lot of people to think that I'm you and that you're really interested in really big answers to questions, then they will overwhelm you for me, and I stay out of the picture. The one that was used for GitHub was a Memcache attack, and it had an amplification of 50,000, which means the attackers, for every kilobyte worth of bandwidth of requests that they sent out to servers to attack you, 50,000 times the amount of data came flooding back at the target. So they don't need a whole lot of data. They're not going to stick out. You know, they don't need a big network pipe to get it done. Okay, direct attack, you're asking for jail if you do that. This is if you attack somebody directly. Another type of attack, if my PowerPoint will advance for me, is a botnet attack where you install software in a whole bunch of systems, and either at an appointed hour that you assigned when you installed it, or on a periodic basis when they check back with the mothership for a packet or two and hope they don't get caught, they'll find out when they're supposed to wake up and launch the attack. And they'll all gang up and attack a target. An amplification attack is when you pretend that you send something that these guys believe are coming from the target. It's a perfectly legitimate request. Memcached attacks were ones where you would go to DNS caching servers, not DNS, web caching servers, and you would say, hey, do you have a copy of the New York Times webpage? Or this one, or this one, or this one. Can you send it to me? And lots of people, tens of thousands of people, had never turned off the feature in their web caching server to answer web caching requests from the outside world, which they shouldn't be doing. They should only be answering web caching requests from their own users inside their network. So these attackers figured this out, and they just went and sent a packet to all of these, a bunch of them, and said, I am this target. You know, I'm not, but I'm the target, and I would like these web pages, please. And it just overwhelms the target. It's extremely effective because of the degree of amplification. Think about a GET request for a URL, get index.html, host, and then that's it. What is that, like 20 bytes? A single packet? And you get back, with the New York Times, megabytes worth of data. So that's effective if you can get it done, and it worked. Here's the memcache attack on GitHub. It lasted for only 15 minutes. So they basically told all of these web caching servers, I'm GitHub, and I would like for you to send me this data. It lasted for such a little amount of time and made these guys like the poster child for how to do this the correct way, because they had signed up for a DDoS mitigation service with Akamai, who also distributed a lot of their content for them. And what happened when the attack happened is they activated their mitigation service, and Akamai's mitigation team quickly figured out what was different about these packets from all others, like they were coming from, for this website in particular or whatever, maybe it was a certain code or a certain bit set in the header or whatever, and they immediately they did two things. They pushed DNS entries to all of the ISPs around the world, because Akamai has servers at all ISPs around the world to hand out Microsoft software and Netflix movies and everything else. They're a big deal. They're a content distribution network. So they pushed out DNS entries to all the ISPs to say, GitHub is now the server. And so they shunted all the traffic over, not to one place on the internet, but to thousands of places, and they fractured the attack. So, you know, now it's like a little bit, and it's a server set up specifically to be sacrificed for DDoS attacks. And then they pushed a rule to it as soon as they knew that let them stop that traffic and let the legitimate traffic on through. So it had to be really discouraging to the attackers, or maybe it was quite impressive to the attackers. The day after it happened, it was in all the technical magazines because they talked about it. And a lot of times people will not talk about attacks. We think there was one bigger the next week, but the company would not agree to disclose it. So the day afterwards, the person that was in charge of the mitigation service at Akamai said something that I think he probably did not intend to say, unless he was catfishing or trolling the attackers. He said, you know, this thing got up to 1.35 terabits per second. It's a good thing it didn't get up to 1.4, because that would have been all we could have handled. And I thought, like, well, guess what size the next attack's going to be? I mean, you know, buy another server. So maybe that's true. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he was BSing. But that's what went on with that type of attack. Okay. There's a little bit more in here as well on amplification. You could, up until a couple of years ago, in fact, one of these sites was shut down last year, you could go on the internet to a website, and there were a bunch of them, and you could pay with a Visa credit card or PayPal account or Bitcoin, and pay people to test the resiliency of your network infrastructure. So they would, for a small fee, try and DDoS attack your network. So you could see what the limit was, but that was all BS. That wasn't what it was used for at all. I could pay $23.99 and have them beat the crap out of your network, not mine. I could pay $23 and they would DDoS attack anybody you wanted. So now if you go to these sites, I can't remember what the name of that one company was, but I grabbed pictures of it. I wonder if I grabbed any other pictures in here. I don't think so. Let's see, DDoS report. No, not this one. Backpage. That's it. Backpage is one of these sites. So let me see if I can find this thing here. Okay, so here's the site the day it got captured. So it's like every logo you can imagine. So this is one that they got brought down for child pornography, I think. And then this is one, web stressor. This is one that got shut down for attacks. So they called it Operation Power Off. But it's like every international police force you've ever heard of, from the FBI to Interpol to the Department of Justice, I don't even know where the heck this one's from, Australian Federal Police, Police Scotland, on and on and on. They just coordinated this and just went around and shut them all down. So you'll get caught eventually if you do this kind of stuff, but it was just amazing to me that you could pay to have someone just attack forever for $25. You know, somebody makes you mad, and you don't like the service, bring them down. These sites are really good. These security sites like Encapsula are excellent. If you want to learn more about security, they post blog entries and have newsletters that have detailed reports on what's going on in attacks, how many there are, how they're changing, what they look like, where they're coming from. And in this case, this month that I looked at, 32% of the people just had one attack. 30% of the people had 10 or more. 30% of the people had 2.5, and then one guy had 242. And I did the math on it, and it's like every breakfast, lunch, and dinner, every day of the month, you have an attack. I'd like a quarter pounder with cheese, please. Would you like an attack with that? Yes, I would, please. How about a mocha coffee, please? What size venti? Would you like an attack with that? Yes, I would. So every time you sit down for a meal, you get attacked again. Like, what kind of job is that? So who knows who it is? But you know, it's probably a bank or someone like that. All right. See if I got anything else in here that's useful. This one was an interesting attack. They had all the right equipment. They just put it in the wrong place. So this intrusion detection system and the firewall, the firewall was getting worn out. What they needed to do was move this system up front. And so I think this was Neiman Marcus stores, which is like Palacio de Hierro. So they moved the device up in front, and the firewall was able to start passing data again. So you can see the time here. It's basically minute within 3 minutes. This IDS box had the ability to handle the attack load and let the good traffic pass through, but the firewall didn't. So normally this is how you would structure it. They did it right, but they needed to reverse these two in order to stop the attack. So sometimes the solution's a lot different than you think. Sometimes you just have to kind of reorder things instead. Like put the right X-Men in front of this particular attacker. Okay, that's what I got for you guys. You have next Wednesday off. When we get back together next time, we will have dinner, thanks to you, and my credit card, and review for the final. Good? The end is near. I mean that in a good way, though. Who knows? The end may be near. Repent now, networkers. Okay. See you guys later.